Okay, 7-4 is special right triangles. We have two special rules we're going to learn. One is 45, 45, 90, and the other one is 30, 60, 90. These rules are basically a shortcut for a lot of other ways that you can solve for these unknowns. But once you embrace these shortcuts, they're actually very easy to use. So the first one I want to talk about is 45, 45, 90. Understand what the picture looks like. So we have two 45-degree angles and we have a 90-degree angle, obviously. Because we have two 45-degree angles, we have two legs that have the same length. Remember, the legs are the part that make up the 90-degree angle. Directly across from your 90-degree angle is your hypotenuse. This rule says that this is your extended ratio of the three sides. 1 to 1 to the square root of 2. What that means to us is the rule is you take a leg, multiply by the square root of 2, and you get the hypotenuse. This is the simplest way I can make it. So this is the rule you need to know. And like anything, I might give you a leg and you have to find the hypotenuse. I might give you the hypotenuse and you have to find the leg. So be able to handle it no matter what's given to you. So let's look at some examples. Look at the first red example here. First thing I'm going to do is make sure that I'm using the correct formula. I mean, obviously I just explained this, so this is going to be a 45, 45, 90, but know that on tests, homework, you may need to take that extra step to make sure you're using the right formula. This is a 45, 45, 90, which means I'm allowed to use this rule. I'm going to label everything. This 6 is a leg, and that X is the hypotenuse. So I always label everything so that I don't make mistakes. Then I'm going to write this formula, so again, I don't make mistakes. Leg times the square root of 2 is the hypotenuse. By writing that formula, that keeps you from making a mistake and putting something in the wrong spot. I labeled up here that the leg is 6 times the square root of 2, and the hypotenuse is X. Don't overthink this. 6 times the square root of 2 is just 6 square root of 2. In general, with radicals, you can multiply them if they're both under a radical, or you can multiply them if they're both not under a radical. In this case, 6 times the square root of 2 is very similar to saying, what is 6 times x? You would just say 6x, right? Kind of the same idea. So 6 times the square root of 2 is 6 square root of 2. Before you're said and done, make sure that it is simplest radical form. In other words, can anything be simplified? Is there any perfect square factor under that radical? There is not. Is there anything else to simplify? There is not. And you'll see some examples of that in a few minutes. Go on to my next example. This is a 45, 45, 90, so I can use this rule of leg times the square root of 2 is the hypotenuse. I'm going to label everything. This is my leg. This is the hypotenuse. Again, labeling is going to keep you from making mistakes. I'm going to write my formula. Leg times the square root of 2 is the hypotenuse. Once I write my formula, I'm going to plug in what I know, solve for what I don't know. And the leg is 9 square root of 2, and the hypotenuse is labeled as x. So think about this one in steps. Remember what I told you a few minutes ago? You can multiply them if they're both under radicals. Both of these 2's are under radicals, so I'm allowed to multiply them. So this becomes 9 times the square root of 4. Well, I know the square root of 4. What is that?
2.
2. So this becomes 9 times 2, which means the answer is 18. So again, this is because I'm allowed to multiply these two 2's because they're both under radicals. Can't do anything with the 9. It kind of gets dragged on until I combine it here. So 18 is x. Continuing on with my next example. It's obviously a 45, 45, 90, but how do I know that? How can I verify that if this was just a random problem like on the SOL? How can I verify it?
Because one angle is 90 and the other two are the same, which means they must be 2 times.
They would have to be, because we know that all three have to add up to 180, and if this is already 90, that means these two would have to add up to 90, which means they'd have to be 45 each. So don't just assume, make sure you understand why. So I'm going to label it. This is a leg. This is my hypotenuse. I'm going to write my rule. Leg times the square root of 2 is the hypotenuse. Plug in what I know. the leg is x, and the hypotenuse is 5 square root of 2. So my basic equation solving, you got to go back to those basic questions that you learned years ago. My goal is to get that x by itself, which means this square root of 2 has to go away. So what is the x and the square root of 2 doing now? What operation? They're not dividing. What are they doing now? Adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing? They're multiplying now. So equation solving skills tells us to do the opposite operation. The opposite of multiplying is, I think this is what you were thinking a minute ago. So we're going to divide by the square root of 2 to get that x by itself. Whatever I do on one side, I have to do exactly the same thing on the other. On the left-hand side, my square roots cancel and I have x left. What about on the right-hand side? What does that equal? What's that give me? 5, because the square root of 2's cancel. That gives me 5. Look at the last one. It's a 45, 45, 90. Who can explain why? Go ahead.
So both of the legs are the same, so that means that angle's the same and that angle's the same.
It basically ties into what we just talked about. If these two are the same, then these two angles must be the same. So they have to be 45, 45, 90. So these are both legs, and this one is my hypotenuse. So that means I'm allowed to use the 45, 45, 90 rule, which is leg times the square root of 2 equals hypotenuse. So hopefully you guys are seeing the way I'm doing this is going to keep you from making mistakes. Label, write the rules, substitute. The leg in this case is x, and the hypotenuse is 8. So we're kind of going down the same path as we did in the previous problem. I'm going to divide by the square root of 2 to get x by itself. My square root of 2's cancel and I have x left. On the right, remember we talked about this as our warm-up. We have a radical in the denominator that we have to get rid of. So that we can't leave it that way, it's an improper form. So I need to transform this without changing the number, without changing the value. So what I'm going to do is multiply by 1. That won't change the value, but it'll rearrange some things for me. I'm going to multiply by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. This is 1. So that means that's not changing the value of that, but by multiplying by square root of 2 over square root of 2, it's going to make that radical get out of the denominator. When we multiply fractions, top times top gives me 8 square root of 2. Bottom times bottom gives me the square root of 4, which is what? 2. Do you see how by multiplying by the square root of 2, it gets rid of that radical in the denominator? We don't just do magic and erase it. You have to actually do something and show it as to why it goes away. Now we have an 8 and a 2. They're both not under radicals. What does that simplify to? 8 divided by 2 is 4. So our final answer is 4 square root of 2. Questions on this so far? Okay, let's go on to 30, 60, 90. So this is our other new rule. 30, 60, 90 triangle, we obviously have a 90-degree triangle. We have 30 degrees and 60 degrees. I want to point out that directly across from the 30-degree angle is your short leg. Directly across from your 60-degree angle is your long leg. And then, of course, directly across from your 90-degree angle is your hypotenuse. The extended ratio for this one is 1 square root of 3 and 2. Taking that idea, these are the two rules that you need to know for this 30, 60, 90 theorem. Short leg times 2 is the hypotenuse, and short leg times the square root of 3 is the long leg. So these are two rules that you need to know to figure out unknowns. Let's look at our first example. So first of all, like I was doing with the other examples, this is a 30, 60, 90, which means I'm allowed to use these rules. The next thing I'm going to do is label everything. Across from 30 is going to be my short side. Across from 60 is my long side. Across from 90 is my hypotenuse. I'm going to start this one with my first rule. Short times 2 equals the hypotenuse. Always write your rule, guys. very easy to make a mistake if you don't. Short is x, hypotenuse is 16. What's x? X is 8. So with these problems, I like to put the answer back in my picture because you might need it for your next step. In this case, you do. So in order to find the long side, I have to use this rule. So the rule says short times the square root of 3 is long. I just found that short is 8 and long is labeled as y. So what's y? Multiply those for me. Don't hurt your
8
brains.
square root of 3.
Caleb? Good. This is just like the example that I talked a few minutes ago. It's just multiplying. One's under a radical and one's not, so let's just put them together, 8 square root of 3. Questions on this one? Okay, these are all very similar. I'm going to keep going here. I'm going to label them hypotenuse. This one's the short leg, and this one's the long leg. So for this one, I can't start with short and hypotenuse, that first rule, because there's two unknowns. I can't do anything with it. So I'm going to start with my second rule, which is short times the square root of 3 equals long. Short is x. Long is 13 times the square root of 3. So hopefully you're seeing a pattern. A lot of these problems are very similar. I have to get x by itself, so I need to divide by the square root of 3 to get x by itself. Whatever I do on this side, I have to do exactly the same thing on the other. My square root of 3's cancel, and I have x left. Square root of 3's cancel, and I have 13. So my short side is 13. I still have to find y. That's my other rule. My other rule is short times 2 is hypotenuse. Looking at my picture, I just found that my short side is 2. So what's y?
26.
26. One more. So we have 30, 60, 90. So again, that allows us to use those two rules. Let's label. Across from 60 is the long. Across from 30 is my short. Across from my 90-degree angle is my hypotenuse. So for this one, I'm going to start with short and hypotenuse because there's only one unknown. So short times 2 gives me hypotenuse. Short is 11. So what's my hypotenuse?
22.
22. Now I can use my other rule. Short times the square root of 3 equals long. Short is 11. Long is y. So what is my long side, or what is y?
11 square root of 3.
11 square root of 3. Don't overthink that. Questions so far on this idea with 30, 60, 90 before I keep going? Okay, these two tables are using the rules that we just talked about. So first of all, I can look at this and see that it's a 45, 45, 90. So I know I'm allowed to use this rule. So leg times the square root of 2 equals the hypotenuse. This is the rule I'm allowed to use. X is my leg. Y is my hypotenuse. I can see that by my picture. So let's think about this without necessarily showing our work. So I know that I can take this leg, multiply by the square root of 2, and give me this as the hypotenuse. So this one should be pretty easy to do. Take my x's, multiply by the square root of 2, and that gives me y. So let's do this one first. So 4 times the square root of 2, what do I put here? 4 square root of 2. See how easy that is? Again, we're going down. So this one you have to think about a little bit. So if I take 12 square root of 2 and multiply by the square root of 2.
12 square root of 4 or 2.
Square root of 2 and square root of 2 can't be multiplied because they're both under radicals. Square root of 4 we can do because that gives me 2. So what's my hypotenuse?
24.
24. So that was going this direction. So if going this direction is multiplying by the square root of 2, what do you think we're going to be doing this direction? Dividing by the square root of 2. We're going in the opposite direction. So let's think about this one. 5 square root of 2 divided by the square root of 2, what's that going to give me?
5.
5. That should make sense. Because remember, going in this direction, you multiply by the square root of 2. This way you divide. If this is hard for you guys and you're not seeing this, do it this way. Write the rule and write everything out. Okay? That's okay with me. Okay, so let's look at this one next. 9 square root of 2 divided by the square root of 2. What's that give me? 9. This one's a little bit tricky. 2 divided by the square root of 2. We have a no-no there. We got to fix that. How do I fix it?
Multiply by 1.
Multiply by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. Top times top. Bottom times bottom gives me the square root of 4, which is 2. These 2's cancel out, and I get square root of 2. Did I hear somebody have a question? You guys have a question? Okay, here's our 30, 60, 90. Let me do this in a different color here. So A is my short leg, B is my long leg, and C is my hypotenuse. My 2 rules that I'm going to use for this is short times 2 is hypotenuse, and short times the square root of 3, bless you, is long. So let's start with easy stuff. Short times 2 gives me hypotenuse. Short is 8. What's my hypotenuse?
15.
That's an easy one. How about here? If my hypotenuse is 22, what does my short leg have to be? 11. Good. How about over here? My hypotenuse is 18. What's my short have to be?
9.
See, that wasn't too hard. Let's look at these 2 now. So from short to long, I take my short, multiply by the square root of 3, and that gives me long. What's that going to be? 5 square root of 3. This one's a little bit trickier. So I have 3 square root of 3, and I'm multiplying by the square root of 3. This gives me the square root of 9. Square root of 9 is 3. So this all simplifies to 9. So these tables look like they could be overwhelming. They really are not. Start with the easy stuff. Write your rules out. Okay? Go ahead.
How is the long leg bigger than the hypotenuse?
Put this in your calculator for me. What's 6 times the square root of 3? Let me come back to that. Over here, we need to determine if the lengths form a 45, 45, 90 or 30, 60, 90. So the 2 rules we need to remember in this case is 45, 45, 90 looks like this, and 30, 60, 90 looks like this. So we want to see if these numbers fit this format. Well, this one, in order for it to be a 45, 45, 90, you have to have 2 lengths the same. They are not. So there's no way this is a 45, 45, 90. It could be a 30, 60, 90, but we need to verify that. So does this fit this format? It absolutely does. I take my short and multiply by 2, and that gives me long. I take my short and multiply by the square root of 3, and I get 5 square root of 3. So this one is a 30, 60, 90. This one, because I see 2 lengths the same, I kind of suspect that it could be a 45, 45, 90. But does it fit this format?
No.
Do I take a leg, multiply by the square root of 2, and get this?
No.
Absolutely not. So this one can't be either. This one's a neither. The last one, again, it looks like it could be a 45, 45, 90. I want to see if it fits this format. Does it?
Yes.
The legs are the same. I take a leg, multiply by the square root of 2, and that gives me the hypotenuse. So this one is a 45, 45, 90. Here's your homework.